It's more complicated than that. The main thing, the main thing I would argue here is that oftentimes, or I would say, is that in the realm of public communication or in the realm of political communication, oftentimes we argue what is private and what is public. And so what is private and public is up for grabs, and it's part of the larger process of politics and political communication. So there. That being said, what are some other big giant points regarding political communication and ideology before we get into more stuff that the book has to say? So this is sort of in the book, but not really. This is just for your big time education. What is communication? What is rhetoric and all that type of stuff? I will use the term rhetoric and political rhetoric and everything like that a lot in this class because in part I'm a rhetorician. What that means is that I study rhetoric. What that means is if you go sort of the old hat way, straight from Aristotle, rhetoric is finding in any given situation the available means of persuasion. And then most folks just sort of think, okay, therefore rhetoric is the art of persuasion, which it is. Now a lot of folks in politics and in the media and stuff like that always sort of put a nasty spin on rhetoric, like rhetoric is something that's bad. It's a tool, it's an art. And so when people say mere rhetoric, that mere rhetoric is itself rhetoric. It's anything that you say or do that could potentially invite people to see the world in a particular way that might lead them to a certain perspective about how to solve a particular public problem or who to vote for. So, in a lot of ways, communication can be anything, any sort of message that, out of intention or not, a human constructed, even a sort of symbol that a human constructed that another human being might get something from, like random memes or I don't know. You remember back in the day when Obama won South Carolina during the 2008 campaign, Bill Clinton said, well, Jesse Jackson did as well, and a lot of people sort of interpreted that as racist in light of the demographic makeup of the Democratic Party in South Carolina. Did he intend it that way? I don't know, but nonetheless, it was there, and so communication really can be anything that any human being says or does or whatever, any symbol, and out of intention or not, what we might get from that. And then rhetoric is more specifically intentional communication in order to persuade. However, again, it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, have to be intentional because we can do things and say things that might invite people out of our knowledge or not. We do it unwittingly sometimes. Invite them to see the world this way versus that way. And so when we think about political communication then, or political rhetoric, it's really anything anybody says or does or any symbol within the political context and the context of trying to solve public problems that might invite an audience member, a voter, a constituent, whatever, to see the world in a particular way or to decide who to vote for, decide that they support this or that policy. Does that make sense? Now the thing is, everybody, no matter who you are, what your political perspective might be or whatever, you tend to think that truth is on your side. But what is truth? You cannot handle the truth. It depends. Is there truth? I guess there's truth. I mean, I know this will drop if I let it go. Okay. So, okay. But when it comes to public policy, perspectives. But the thing is, one of the things that I want you to do as we're thinking about this whole idea of what political communication is, what rhetoric is, and this idea that everybody sort of thinks that their way is the best way, we need to totally get away from that. I think one of the main problems with our society is that we tend not to listen to what we perceive as the other side, and then we, of course, polarize sides. I think, this is a quote that I made up, if you think you have all the answers, you cease to be educated. If you hate Trump, listen to what he has to say. He might agree with some of the stuff. If you hate Clinton, listen to what she has to say. And hate is a bad word. I don't mean to say that, but we tend to think, I'm not going to listen to this garbage, blah, blah, blah. Because I know what I think and I know what I believe, and so this other stuff. Blah, blah. So some other more sort of big ideas. Okay, now the basic questions here. So this is I'm now moving into sort of the basic question, moving away from the basis of political communication and the ideas of public versus private and blah, 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 blah. How much freedom versus how much order? And if you notice in the conclusion, Hahn adds to that. He basically says how much personal freedom versus how much government order. So that's sort of what he means. Personal freedom versus government order. And I really like these questions. I think they're really good. And I do think there's the mailman. He always barked at the mailman. That's sad. Okay. I'm a sick puppy. Pardon the pun. But what we have here is he wants to boil everything down to freedom and order. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about how people make arguments, how people think about, government and everything like that. But he does also say that a lot of the ideas about this obviously come from our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, even I would argue the Declaration of Independence. And I will let you sort of read some of that stuff. I'm not going to go over these documents in class, man. You can go read it, but just know that our ideas of what freedom and what order come from, all that type of stuff, and the genealogy of folks arguing for freedom, for order, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the question, how much freedom versus how much order, really given any sort of public issue. And the basic arguments people make are usually arguments from principle. This is our principle, this is the American thing to do, so this is what we should do. Or consequence, we should do this because these will be the consequences. If we, lower taxes, people will spend more money and our economy will flourish. Okay, and both types of arguments can support both freedom and order. So what we got is sort of a template for, in a sense, political argumentation. How much freedom versus how much order is the question. The answers come from the mode of argument, argument from principle or argument from consequence. And so there's lots of good examples for you to sort of understand these things. On page 5, for example, a favoring freedom argument could be God created us to be free, no lesser being should enslave us. That's obviously a principle because it has nothing to do with consequence. Favoring order, God provided us rules for living, no lesser being should tamper with those rules. Again, another principle. Favoring freedom from consequence, one can achieve the good consequences of a saved soul only by freely choosing between good and evil. Favoring order, one can achieve the good consequence of a saved soul only within a society that follows God's rules. That's sort of consequence. Long and story short of it is that we either base our ideas on principle. This is what we should do. This is the American thing to do. Or consequence. If we do this, it will have good consequences or negative consequences. That's pretty much it. And then all the issues sort of, swirl around, wiggle around the issues or the question of, should we have order here? Government order? Should we have freedom? Order or freedom? Freedom or order? Coke or Pepsi? Sort of but that makes sense. Okay. Crazy liberals and crazy conservatives. I do like generally the little box on page 6 and that table, that delightful little table and box. Here is, even though we should always realize that things exist within a continuum, and the formula, he does have a little preface or a little caveat. He said it would be wonderfully simple if, with the case that everybody always, favored order or favored freedom, blah, 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 blah. That it's never easy. Nothing is ever easy. This is all messy. But generally speaking, liberals believe in personal freedom in the civil rights arena. Liberals believe in government order in the economic arena, in part because they think that order in the economic arena will help people with personal freedom in the civil rights arena. They are connected. Conservatives believe in government order in the civil rights arena. Conservatives believe in personal freedom in the economic arena. So we're still dealing with ideas of economics and rights. So that's another sort of big sort of thing that's always going to be with us. Issues of freedom and order, issues of argument by consequence, argument by principle, and everything teeter-tottering on economics or rights. And so there's this little box. But here's the thing. Oh, yeah. And remember, again, the world's complicated. So I do not want you to read this and say, okay, therefore all liberals must obviously think this, or all conservatives must obviously think that. That's not how the world works. But again, it's most likely going to be the situation. And the whole idea of us living in a polarized world, seeing things as either or, and even those either ors being totally exaggerated, sort of like how Hahn implies when he talked about taxes or writes about taxes. That's all really problematic, but we'll talk about how media impacts politics and everything like that later on. So give me my rights. Let's picture of a rat. Does government give rights? Does government take away rights? Don't know. It depends on your rights. I want my rights. You got to fight for your right to party. You have the right to remain sexy. That's a scary rat. Everything sort of depends. It depends on what the idea. What does rights mean? I mean, obviously, it comes from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What does that mean? What are rights? What should we have the right to? And does the government give us rights? Does it take away rights? Do we have some initial a priori right offered by God? Or I don't know. So some of this oftentimes depends on what we even think about when it comes to rights. All right, right. I do think at the end of the day, the last little bit of that final paragraph before Hahn gets to major contemporary arguments, he writes this: in short, as conservatives see the issue, they still are supporting the idea of order. That is, the issue of economics should be free of government order, even if it is enforced by private powers rather than the government. So, for instance, generally speaking, conservatives like the free market economy and think the government should get out of the way, and it's self-correcting. The powers will, even though it's not government order, it will, the various powers within that will self-correct, and so they still have order. For liberals, just as individuals need to be free of government order in the realm of civil rights, they need to be free from the constraints of capitalistic order in economic right, or in the economics. And so the only way to do unchecked capitalism is government. Right? So it gets sort of complicated. But generally speaking, okay, so we got freedom, economics. I'm a conservative. I don't want government to tell me what to do with my money. I don't want taxes. I don't want more regulations in the free market society. Let things fly, and there's going to be a self-correcting thing in there. So far as when it comes to economics and liberals, hey, the unchecked capitalism, we got the 1% who they make all the money. There's loopholes in the taxes. They're not getting taxed enough and everything like that. It's unfair. They are treating workers like crap. We got to have more regulations. We got to do something to Wall Street to help the people. We need more order. And then when it comes to personal rights, but then again, see, going back, one would say that, you're infringing on my rights if you make me pay taxes. Or if there's some sort of new government regulation that says that you cannot